Hi, I'm Nicole Davidson, and this is the Negotiation in Real Life podcast, the show where we take the lessons learned in real life negotiations to help you build your negotiation toolkit. We'll be hearing from lawyers, entrepreneurs, and senior business people about their best and worst negotiations. Negotiation is one of the most important skills for success in business and in life, but it's a skill we are rarely taught. For many of us, we develop our skills purely through trial and error. We see what works, discard what doesn't, and if we're lucky, we'll have a few good mentors along the way. In this podcast, we're going to give you access to an even greater range of negotiation mentors. Enjoy this episode and please reach out if you have any questions. In today's episode of Negotiation in Real Life, I speak with Virginia Walker, the founder of Transformation Journey. Virginia is a mentor, author, and speaker. Her abiding passion is enabling workplaces where people learn, grow, and thrive. This passion was ignited at the age of 16 when her first job as a trainee accountant transformed her life. 30 years of senior leadership experience in companies including Commonwealth Bank, Hewlett Packard and IBM have honed Virginia's understanding of one of the most challenging things an organisation can do: radically reform the way it does business. Practicing as an executive coach and mentor, she wrote The Truth About Transformation. In this book, Virginia shares 10 key myths every leader must know to survive their transformation project, helping leaders demystify and deal with the challenges they are likely to face. Virginia now combines her significant financial pedigree and deep understanding of industry disruption and organisational change to work with CEOs of NDIS service providers who want to lead purpose-driven organisations that thrive. In this episode, we chat about the importance of understanding perspectives, the challenge of an imbalance in knowledge, working to become a desired business partner, how to learn through observing others, negotiating with multidisciplinary teams and across cultures, why attention to detail is important in negotiations, how to respond where a bad deal has been done, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode. Welcome to the Negotiation in Real Life podcast, Virginia.
It's a pleasure to be here, Nicole.
Excellent. Now, we had a lovely chat the other day, sort of getting to know each other and finding out a little bit about you. And I think there's going to be some fantastic things about the various experiences that you've had of negotiation. But before we get into that, can you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Thank you. So I'm Virginia Walker. I'm a mentor and speaker and coach, also an author, and I specialize in leadership and change. And I work with CEOs, board members, and executives of not-for-profits who want to lead happy people, be financially secure, and live their purpose.
Fantastic. Now, I know you've had a fairly senior level career prior to coming into the work that you're doing now, and that's given you some exposure to a wide range of negotiations. Tell us a little bit about the kinds of negotiations that you've been involved in over your career.
So I started my life as an accountant, and the world of sales and, people who negotiated transactions or deals, I always thought they were like different people. They had different backgrounds or different personalities. And as I moved through my career, I worked alongside some salespeople. I went, I could do that. Oh my word, I could do that. And so I ended up doing that. I ended up moving into sales roles. So I won't go into my career at the moment, but I spent quite some time in the IT industry, and then I moved into the IT outsourcing industry. And obviously the negotiations, the deals that are in that industry are significant. They are often multi-year, 5 years, 10 years, and involve, usually the ones I was involved in, millions, if not tens, and sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars. So there was a lot to learn in the world of negotiation around outsourcing. And, we did speak a little bit about what you learn. I guess the other thing I learned through my sales roles and that experience is how you personally negotiate, what you take into personal situations. So there's a whole lot of everything from negotiating for my own positions to being part of a big team, putting together deals in the hundreds of millions. So yes, lots of negotiation over my career.
Absolutely. And so when you look back to some of those earlier roles, some of those earlier sales roles where you had to negotiate and perhaps didn't have so much of a background in that space, were there any particular learning moments that stood out or negotiations that perhaps didn't go quite according to plan?
Well, I was extraordinarily lucky that one of the reasons I moved into the sales roles was because I was in a finance role working with a sales manager. And we had somebody in the corporate world who was being very stroppy and, very uncooperative. And so we had to go in and say, look, we can't really work with what you're saying. We're going to have to go above your head, basically, because we need to get a resolution. And basically, this particular manager let me have that conversation, and he walked out. We walked out of it, and he said, "That was a good sales call." And at the time, I went, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "No, it was a good sales call. You said what you needed to say, but you didn't leave him in the corner. You didn't leave him needing to defend his position. You allowed him to have his position, but you just let him know you didn't agree with it." And so I guess that somewhat set of tone for all negotiations. And to this day, I say to people who I mentor and I coach, I went, don't put people in a position where they have to defend.
Absolutely.
Do anything you can to not go there, because when people go into defend and fear brain, as we now know, you're not going to get a win-win outcome. You're not going to get a great, there won't be a great negotiation. There won't be, because that person's just trying to stop you, making them feel defensive and not good enough.
Absolutely. That psychological element of how they leave the negotiation feeling is really important, isn't it? And recognizing that people want their opinions respected, even if you can't work with them. So I think that's really important. And whether it's, conflict or whether it's some other sort of more proactive negotiation, that ability, William Ury talks about building a golden bridge for the other side. How do you actually create that sense that even if they don't get what they want, they can leave with their head held high?
Yeah, I love the golden bridge. I'll remember that. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I absolutely subscribe to that.
Is there anything particular that you do when you're in a negotiation to help? I mean, because it's that great idea of, I need to help that person save face or, give them that sense of being heard as well. What are some of the techniques that you use?
So I might go back to my earlier, experience in sales, where I had a little rule for myself where I wouldn't speak for the first 15 or 20 minutes. If it was like an hour on call, I wouldn't, I would acknowledge, be active listening, but I would not be thinking about what I wanted to say. And what I found was the power of, you then got to understand where the other person was coming from, and then you realize, and I use this little diagram, and it's a very simple diagram where, you think we're taking someone from A to B, right? So there's this straight line, and you're trying to get them, in any negotiation or conversation, often we're trying to get someone from A to B. And as I said to a boss many, many years ago, I said, and what if they're not at A?
Yeah.
What if they're not at A? And so we need to check where people are before we try and get them from A to B. So I'm saying if they're over at C, then, you've got to work out how to get them from C to B. And I was talking to this particular person the other day, and I said, I think you're really good at working out there at C. But then what I observe, and I could be wrong, is you're trying to get them back to A so you can get them to B. Could you come and see it from my perspective so I can get you over there? Whereas that, letting go of that position and just letting go of it. Yes. And working out that you in the end, if you want the outcome you want, if B's what you want, and you think you might be able to get them to B, then go over to C and see what it looks like over there.
I think that's so right, isn't it? And that central idea that we've just got to understand that everybody's perspective is different. And, it's not about going one of those perspectives is right or wrong. They just are, they just exist. And until you understand those perspectives, it's very difficult to move a negotiation forward, and trying to force somebody to your perspective, as you said, I think it comes back to that basic, each and every force has an equal and opposite reaction. So the more I push you to come to my perspective, the more you push back.
And the irony is, often what you want, the other person or the other side or the other part of the negotiation will let you have if you give something else up.
Yes.
Yeah. So that we often think there's this just direct relationship between what we want and what they want, and it's just either I'll win or you'll win. Whereas, as I know you will know, that every negotiation has these range of things that we want as individuals, organizations, and the party we're negotiation has a range of things that they want as individuals or as a negotiation or as an organization. And so if you can play those pieces intelligently, then you can all come out feeling like you've got the wins that you needed for this to be a good outcome.
Absolutely. And, as you said, if you spend the first period of a negotiation, whether that's 15 minutes of an hour meeting or whether it's one meeting out of a series of meetings, just understanding where they're coming from, you can identify more and more of those sources where there might be some flexibility.
Absolutely.
And I think, rather than just what they've told you, which, so often we're in a hurry, we only tell people the top level. But we've got to dig down further, and we've got to do that from our own perspective as well to really understand where we've got the trade-off ability as well.
And what I also found is that you can be in a position. I've been in a position where I or the people we're working with, we actually understand more of the subject matter that we're negotiating with the client. So, for example, in IT outsourcing, we understand quite a lot of what works and what doesn't work, and so the client may not have that knowledge or experience. Yeah, and so expecting them to be able to articulate what they want really precisely is actually unreasonable. So I love what you're saying, that you have to hear with your broader perspective, with your broader understanding, so you can help them get to a place where they go, yes, actually, that's what I want. And perhaps reframe a conversation. I mean, that happened for the purposes of not disclosing a party, but I was heading up a negotiation with a fairly significant organization in the private sector. And they were not that experienced in the outsourcing world, and so they were trying to get all these pieces at different prices, and they were kind of negotiating piecemeal, right? And we were like, but this is not going to work. Like we're all going to end up, just spiraling down what's the word? A combative relationship. So. I reframe the conversation that says, if we can get better understanding of what's really important to you, and then we put something to you that we think will achieve that, could we start there? and then we start there, so that we're closer to being on the same page of what a good outcome is for both of us, and then we can negotiate on the edges. We can negotiate, but we're not trying to find the core of where we meet. And then another diagram I draw is like two circles with an overlapping bit, and I'm like, so if you can find the overlap in a negotiation, if you can find the bit where you both want the same, you're both going to get something out of it, that there is this sweet spot of a deal. And I used to after a while you got to kind of listen's probably the wrong word, but you got your intuition at some point when this deal has a sweet spot. We will now persevere through the challenges of it because we know what we want from each other.
Yes.
Yeah, we know what we want, and it's quite clear, and we want something the other person's got, and they want something, or the organization. And once that was clear, the rest of it used to be more, now you were just doing the hard yards. Yeah, you were just going through the stuff. But if that wasn't there, I don't think you could ever get to any kind of sound outcome.
Well, it's interesting, that example that you've just talked about, where there's this real sort of knowledge imbalance, And, you've talked about the client really wanting to have very specific agreements around each element, and once again, I think coming back to going, well, what's the underlying fear or concern that they've got in requiring that, which is, presumably it was something around not being taken advantage of, making sure they're only paying for what they need because they don't understand the entire market and how it all fits together. So, once again, I always think, every objection is an opportunity to ask a question about why they don't like that so that you can really understand those deeper needs.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think you pull out of that a really powerful concept of understanding what the fear is for that other party, and we don't tend to focus on where we have power. Yeah, we're quite casual with it where we have it, right? and we don't realize when it's creating a reaction in the other person or the other organization, and then they're trying to defend themselves against it. So I think it's a great observation. It's like, what's causing the fear, and can you play down some of those things? Can you start talking in simpler language? Can you start making the examples more relevant to the person? Can you start explaining what your concerns are in more basic ways? That. So just get off the power. But
I love that because it's the difference between having the power and choosing not to use it as a weapon, and the difference between having the power, choosing not to use it as a weapon, and letting the other side actually know that you're not doing that. And I think often people will go in with that mindset of, well, I'm not here to take advantage just because I've got the extra power, because I've got extra information. I'm not going to use that to the detriment of my counterpart. But if you haven't actually made that explicit to them, they're still acting on that fear. One of the challenges that comes up in so many negotiations is the assumptions that we make about what the other party knows or believes. And if we've got something in our head, but we haven't communicated it, then the assumption on the other side might be something very, very different.
Very much so. I was alongside and watched a negotiation where the individuals in the organization I work for used that power and got a really good deal, and it doesn't hold. So because at some point the other party work out that they didn't get a good deal, and now you've broken trust, now you've lost trust, and the longer the relationship needs to continue, the worse the outcome's going to be if you've actually done something to break trust or lose trust. And so
absolutely,
I guess just seeing that fairly close hand, that also made me very determined as I got involved in other deals, that we were doing things to build trust, not lose trust.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think one of the things that I've seen, and particularly when you get into larger corporates, like I know your experience has been, is part of the challenge for the organisations is that there's a whole set of conflicting interests within the organisation. So while the organisation itself might care about that long-term trust and the long-term relationship, your sales team might care about the short-term goal of getting a sale and not actually care about what the longer-term outcome is.
Absolutely. No, there was one rather hysterical time. So I once had this role where I headed up the finance team that worked on these big deals. Okay. And so in that role, I used to get the job of signing off the commission sheet for the sales people, right? So, so what was the deal signed up at, what's the margin, what was their commission? And there was one very flamboyant individual who was, quite charismatic and really thought he was kind of the bee's knees. And in one meeting where he managed to organize a meeting where nobody was with him, which was, we should have just banned that. He negotiated away in about an hour the entire profit of the deal. And and then I had to fill out the commission sheet because commissions were paid on revenue, right? And so I gingerly picked up this piece of paper between my forefinger and my thumb And I went into the managing director. I went and looked the other way and put it on his desk and goes, "That is for your signature." And he was just like because he was laughing. It wasn't a particularly big deal, but the point is,
Luckily.
yes, luckily, it was and this is another interesting aspect of negotiation, that the person negotiating did not understand what they were negotiating. They
Or
didn't
because
understand
their
the
personal, well, otherwise it's just because their personal interests were the driving interest. I actually
Very.
understand that it's not as profitable, but guess what? It doesn't matter to me because I get paid based on revenue, not profit.
Yeah, that's right. So do I. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing from both to understand that we personally will behave like that, because you're right.
You can't stop that sort of behavior. I mean, when you incentivize people on certain measures,
Yes.
and I think what's really challenging is for organizations to really sit down and understand how they can create interests across the team that are all aligned, rather than having these mismatched interests.
Yes.
And that's a big challenge for organizations,
Huge.
because equally the levers that you put in to incentivize people have to be within their control. And so if you've got a salesperson who says, "I don't control profit," they don't want to be rewarded on that. So it's quite interesting, but equally, I think from the person who's doing the negotiation on the other side, knowing those individual drivers can be really used to get the optimal outcome for yourself, which clearly happened in that case.
That's right. Yeah. No, great observations. Yes, I saw them. Each way.
I know, once again, that the industry knowledge that you have of, if I'm negotiating with an outsourcing company, or if I'm negotiating with a particular kind of company, how do they work internally? The more I know about their internal systems and rewards programs, the more information I've got to actually push the right buttons to get a good outcome for myself.
Very much so. Yeah.
So I know, Virginia, that you've done quite a bit of negotiating with multidisciplinary teams, international negotiations. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've learned to manage in those situations?
I think it goes back to one of the points you just mentioned, that probably the hardest thing is not negotiating with the individuals internationally. It's actually negotiating back with your organization to recognize the reality of what it's going to take. And so I was in one situation where the organization I worked for was, large and used to being quite powerful in those negotiations and being wooed and, feted to because people wanted their business. And this negotiation involved us wanting to form a partner, and it was going to be very significant. And therefore we had to work out, well, in my mind, it was like they had to want us, like, not we're choosing you. This had to, aren't you lucky? This was, how do we do, how do we become attractive to them? How do we work out? So it's a variation of what we've been talking about, but what matters to them? And so we were in this large room in Germany, and the organization was being very polite to us. They were showing us around, and we had other business with them, so we were customers. But what I was there for was a completely different negotiation, a completely different transaction. And they were kind of like, yeah, that we'll just kind of we'll kind of make you feel nice that you're here, whatever. And so I was like, well, this is not going well. There's four of us have flown the other side of the world to have a very friendly meeting that's not going anywhere. And so, but so we had a mock-up of the thing that we wanted to work with them on. And these guys were engineers, yeah. And so they're about numbers, and they're about design, and they they like to see how things work, right? So I got this mock-up, and I pulled it out, and I just said, oh, we'd like to, if you're okay, I'll just pass this around the room so you can see what we're talking about, what we want to do together. And as it arrived at the most senior person in the room, he held it like a puppy or a kitten, held it, and he looked at his designer next to him. He goes, "Be nice to have one of these, wouldn't it?" And I'm like, "Yes, we just found that moment, that spot. They would like this, right? Okay, all right." So then the conversation could change. Then the conversation was like, "Okay, so if you were to want to do one of those, what would it take?" So
it's really, yeah, if I can sort of pull out what's been going on there that you would replicate elsewhere, it's about creating that picture for them. So it's not doing the hard sell, it's actually creating the desire through putting something in front of them that is attractive and meets their interests, without even having to tell them how great it is. They just figure it out for themselves.
That's right. So it's that whole, it's a classic piece of negotiation theory, which is you want a third position. You don't want I win, you lose, I win, whichever way around it goes. You actually want that third position. Like, what's win-win? What is a place where you could go to? What's the thing you would go to that means you both feel like you've won? And and so that's the underlying theory, I guess. And so it's always about the creativity in the situation. What is that third position? What is that win-win?
Now, you've obviously done some very high value transactions with really significant consequences. To get to the point where you've been able to do those negotiations, what have you done to improve your own negotiation skills and make sure that you're capable of taking on these challenges?
That's a great question. I think I went to a negotiation course back in the 1980s, right? It was like a half-day course, and I went to it, and it was a revelation to me that you wouldn't just ask for what you wanted. So that was the first step. That was a revelation, and the rest of it, Nicole, is just hard-fought trial and error, and watching other people, watching how they position things, how they work with complex situations, the relationships that need to be built for something to move forward. And that's true in an individual negotiation or a really large scale transaction. You don't, if we stick to business for a moment, you don't do business with somebody you don't like or don't trust. You don't. And so to think that negotiation can be done in this kind of vacuum, that it can be quite sort of clinical, or it can be very logical, I think that's illusory. We are emotional beings. We like to kid ourselves that we're not, but we are, and therefore that relationship building and where that needs to be done, and how you should invest in that, and what is going to work for you and that other person. I guess that's where I always start.
Absolutely. Negotiation would be so much easier if we were negotiating with robots.
That's right. We would know the moves. Yes.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it sounds like that sort of observation and reflection is a big part of the learning for you. And it's one of the things I'm always encouraging people to do is, after each negotiation, step back and just ask two simple questions: what worked well, what didn't work so well, and why?
Yeah.
And that observation and reflection is critical. We've talked about some of the corporate negotiations. Now, I know you do a bit of work in the area with startups and businesses that are perhaps at a smaller level than what you've experienced in your career. What's the difference that you see in the negotiations that they're doing to the ones that you were involved in at that very sort of large corporate end?
a complete lack of attention to detail, mainly.
So that'd be one of the biggest problems that you're seeing in negotiations.
Yeah. It's a sort of a trust that, that 60-page document doesn't have anything in it that you would worry about. It's like, whoa. So there is so I guess it's the opposite of a corporate environment where you have a legal team that will go through every word, and we don't like that word. And this is the opposite, where I'm going, I do think we need to review this document before we agree that we're going to commit, to do something for the next year or the next 2 years. And even when someone does read it, they read it. In my experience, there are many individuals that read it, interpreting it how they would want it to work.
That's such an important point, isn't it?
And so they're like, but when I read that, that's what I read. It's like, well, when I read that, a lawyer could drive a truck through it. Yeah. Because it's not automatic that it will be interpreted in the way that is being done at the moment. And so we might want to do something that's more rigorous, and more has an example or has an explanation. And so I found that it's there's the lack of resources, there's the lack of expertise, which is not surprising. There's many things that you don't get the luxury of knowing or being around when you're in a smaller organization or a not-for-profit, and those things seem really expensive. And there is a genuine call of, is this something to invest in because that's appropriate risk management, or is this something where we're going to have to, do the best we can?
That's such an important point, isn't it? And that decision about when to invest, not just in the legal side of the negotiations and the deals, but I think it's the negotiations that come before the documentation that are the critical pieces to make sure you get a deal that actually works. And my experience is that either people think that they're perfect at negotiating and, can go through without recognizing perhaps some of those gaps, or they just don't understand that there are resources available to help you with that negotiation strategy piece, where it's going to, as you said, if you're going to be impacted by this for the next couple of years and it's going to largely determine the success of your business, that's where there is.
One of the first things I had to deal with as a CEO was a contract that had been signed, hadn't been approved properly. It committed the organization to something that was really quite unacceptable, and basically I negotiated from a position of nothing. Nothing, not a leg to stand on. It's like, it's a really bad deal. It's like, well, you've signed it. I went, so in the end it was like, are you really going to enforce this deal? And they're like, yes. I'm like, so we kept going, and I just kept talking, and I went, are you prepared to take us out by enforcing this deal? And I just kept going up the organization until, effectively it was pure bluff. But I was like, I have no choice.
Well, it sounds like it was a bit of bluff, but also trying to change their interests into the relationship interest and perhaps reputation as well. So, it's always about finding that lever, isn't it? And it's like, well, okay, well, if the contract is clear, there's nothing, to be done about the contract. You've got to find other ways of pushing that. And it sounds like something that worked for you there was also persistence.
Oh, that's right. And I think you raise a very important point that I kind of hadn't put with that, which is I try to build relationships with the people who were going to enforce it and go, okay, how do we find something out of this? Because we want something like the thing that we've signed up for, but not like that. Yeah, there were some conversations I had with some individuals in my own organization where I literally almost stopped breathing, where their belief in what they had signed up for, what we had bought and what we had actually bought. The gap was extraordinary. So yes, that was an in-your-face moment of when people don't have the experience. There is a reason why you have authority limits and areas where you can't sign things, because you actually don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know.
A very important thing to remember, isn't it? Yes. But also that idea about being, very clear when you're getting to that final agreement, making sure, you've talked about people being able to interpret things in different ways. You want something that as much as possible has one clear interpretation. And, I love what you talked about putting examples in, plain language drafting, and, using examples to illustrate, to say this is how it works in practice, are such great tools to try and avoid those disputes around contract interpretation.
In large outsourcing agreements, around pricing, which was often the area I was working in, there are often worked examples, because sometimes you feel like, you're trying to explain something in all these words, and it's like number times other number equals that thing.
Yeah, keep it simple. Keep it simple.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah.
So obviously you've had these negotiations, and the work that you do now is sort of more broad, working with others. How do you feel your experience of negotiation has changed the way that you deal with others more generally?
It's going to sound a little repetitive, Nicole, because it's the model I use, which is, first of all, engage, like find out where someone's coming from, find out where an individual's coming from, find out where a team's coming from, find out where your organization is, like, where are they? We assume so many things. One of the little models I use, it's a human resources model, which has a triangle, and at the top is motivation. And then on the left, it has skills, and on the right, it has clarity. Okay, so you've got motivation, skills, clarity. We almost always assume any problem is motivation, right? They don't like this, they don't want to do this, they don't like us, they don't like, so it's all in this motivation space. Whereas usually it's around clarity. I don't know what you want. You haven't explained what a good outcome is. You haven't explained any of this. I'm not clear. Often when you've explained that, people will tell you if they don't have the skills. And then if you can help with the skills development, so you've got clarity and skills development, then motivation generally looks after itself.
I think that's so right, isn't it? But it comes down to these fundamental failures of communication, because we told you what we wanted. We told you all of these things. What do you mean you didn't understand?
That's exactly right. With my clients and my mentoring clients, they go, but I've told them. I'm like, okay. Have we checked?
Communication is a two-way process, isn't it?
I said, have we done the 7 times? There's that rule of 7 times. If you said something 7 times, I prefer something a little less, and I'm telling you again, I'm like, I don't think that works. It's like, tell me how you understand this. Explain to me how you understand. Explain how this is working for you, how this isn't working for you. Then I'm like, okay, now I get a better picture.
Absolutely. Well, tell them 7 times is just still one way, isn't it? There's no feedback, there's nothing coming back. And
you probably remember those teachers at school where you went, I wish they'd find another way of explaining this, because I have no idea they're talking about. It's
exactly.
Like, read it again. Well, I didn't understand it the first 3 times, so I'm not sure the 4th is going to crack it.
Exactly.
And so, it's that. It's back to that thing. And I guess in this particular role, I also look at learning styles and behavioral styles and that kind of experience that you bring into things, because that's all the context of why something is landing or not landing. And so that I guess as I've got older, more and more, the beautiful quality of curiosity, it seems so obvious, but it didn't when I was younger. I have the answer, like I have it. I've just got to get people to that answer.
It's a really difficult challenge, isn't it? And I often say that curiosity is the right mindset for a negotiator.
Yeah.
But it is that difference of moving from where I am the expert and I know everything to being okay, realizing that there's things that I might not know. And the perception of expertise as knowing everything, I like to switch it to say the expertise is knowing what are the right questions to ask.
Yeah.
This has been a really interesting conversation, Virginia. Is there any last tip that you'd like to leave that we haven't talked about already in terms of what you think will help people with their negotiations?
I guess there's one little area that where I learned the hard way about negotiation in a one-on-one negotiation, where at the point of being offered a job, I asked the question, do you have anybody else you're considering for this role? And they went, no. I went, so I was thinking, oh, that's nice. I'm not kind of competing with anybody. I didn't think about, well, therefore, what do I want? Is there something that I want at this point that it would be good to put on the table and stay with that power? Because this is the point at which you can actually negotiate that, because you are in a position of power. Once I'd taken the role, that had gone.
Yes.
That had gone. And when I needed support further down the track, and I should have asked for that support up front, it was too late. And so there was a big lesson that, while I could see all these things so wisely, at this big level, when it came to my own world, there was a bit missing. And so I'd encourage individuals to consider, when they're being interviewed, the interviewers don't have all the power.
Absolutely. And I think great advice, particularly at the moment where,
Yes.
and I think some people have latched onto this, but, in an employee short market,
Yes.
Understanding that and using it wisely.
And using it wisely.
Because
Yes.
what you're talking about is a situation of negotiation power, because the alternatives for the other side aren't great.
Yeah.
But using it in a way that is going to get you an outcome without damaging the relationship is that fine balancing act.
Very much. Yes. A great clarification. A very good clarification.
So, Virginia, thank you very much for your time today. I've enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
If people listening to the podcast wanted to reach out and have a chat to you, what's the best ways for them to reach out to you?
I think the best way, Nicole, is to go to my website. It's www.transformationjourney.com.au. There's some options there to take a scorecard, to book a clarity call with me, and find out a little bit about the work I do. My passion is enabling workplaces where people thrive, and I love working with leaders to achieve that end.
Fantastic. And I'll make sure to put those details in the show notes for everybody as well. So if they haven't caught that, they can look in the notes. So once again, thank you. I've really enjoyed our chat and appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I very much enjoyed our chat too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. If you've taken away some great tips from this episode, I'd love to hear about it. So please connect with me via my website or LinkedIn. If you're enjoying the podcast and would like to learn more tips to improve your negotiations, head to our website, nicoledavidsonnegotiation.com.au, where you can follow my blog, view presentations and download resource sheets. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you get every episode as it comes out. If you have an interesting negotiation story that you'd like to share with my audience, head to the website and complete a guest application form. Until the next episode, happy negotiating.